Hi, I'm John with Rio Grande. Watch how I take this and turn it into this using the Bonny Doon hydraulic press and the 3-inch deep draw kit. Come with me as we take a shallow dive into deep draw. Okay, the first thing we need to do is create two 3-inch diameter discs. So what I did here, I cut this sheet into a 3x3. I connected the corners and that gives me the approximate center. Now I'm going to take a set of dividers and I am going to set my one arm right on the center, and then I'm going to scribe a line really lightly around the sheet. And there we go. There's my 3-inch disc. Now all I have to do is cut it out. Okay, so there's a couple ways that you can cut this out. You can use your saw frame and saw blade, but I like to use my bench shear. And what I'll do is I will cut off these corners first, and then I will cut off the corners that I made, and so on and so forth. And you will end up with this, which is almost perfect. And also you have larger pieces here that you can collect for recycling, and you're not wasting any in the swarf from the saw blade. So all you need to do is make sure that you leave your line, the line that you drew, so that you could file up to it, and you'll have yourself a perfect disc. Okay, I've got my disc cut, and now it's time to file. So I'm going to show you how I file. I like to leave the lugs on my GRS bench pen loose so I can easily flip it over and get to the sloped side of the bench pen. I prefer to file on the sloped side of the bench pen for a couple reasons. One, whenever you set your piece on top of the bench pen, you can actually see where you're filing rather than being straight or horizontal. You can actually see your line easier this way. And also I find it easier to grip. So that's a couple reasons that I like to do filing on my sloped side. Another thing I do is I create a notch in my pen so that my file rides in the notch, and my file will be a little bit below the edge of what I'm filing. The reason for that is if I'm trying to keep my file up on top of the bench pen as well as against the metal, it's much easier to slip in the heat of filing and scratch your metal. So I create this little stop. Another thing is whenever you're filing, not only are you filing against the piece, this stop will take a little bit of that pressure away that you're putting against the piece, so it's easier to control. Another thing that I like to control my filing is I will take and drill some holes in my bench pen and then use some broken burrs as a stop. So now whenever I'm filing, I have the piece at an angle so that I can see it. I have a stop so that I can ride my file against that, and I have these to stop the forward momentum of my piece. So it makes it much easier to file this way because all you have to do is control the piece down onto your pen, and you don't have to worry about anything else. Now I'm just going to go around this piece. I'm going to file to my line. Let me get my optivisors on here so I can see. Now, by all means, if you have a mechanical way of doing this, go right ahead. I like doing it this way because, especially if I'm working with more expensive metal, silver and gold, I can easily capture all or most of my filings in my little catch tray, or for me, I have this sling here. So I'm just going to continue on both of these until I'm down to the line, and then we'll proceed. Now I'm going to use a finer file to just deburr the edges of the discs. What the burr can actually do is the burr can actually hide your line. So doing this and making sure that you don't hold it at such an angle that you would cut your line off, you might reveal that you haven't filed all the way down in certain spots. But this disc looks good. Go ahead and just knock off the back side. I'm going to lift it up instead of rotate it because I don't really want to scratch up that pattern side very much. All right. Before I form these, I'm going to anneal them. So even though a lot of material comes from the manufacturer as dead soft, it still has a little bit of hardness to it just from the manufacturing process. So anytime that I'm doing any forming, I go ahead and I anneal my metal prior to doing that. This is a copper and argentium mokumagane. And you want to be careful whenever you're annealing this material because you don't want to try to heat it up to a visible heat, that dull cherry red heat, because that's pushing it towards a heat where you could possibly damage the metal itself. So what I like to do is I will heat this metal up until I start to see the flame kind of fire back at me. You're going to see yellow or orange flames kind of bounce off of the surface. That's when I know that I've got my metal annealed. Being that this is argentium, I am not going to quench it immediately. I'm going to let it set for about 5 minutes before I quench it. Then I'll quench it, and then we'll go ahead and form it. So I'm going to fire up my torch. So if you watch really carefully as this is heating up, I'm going to see that orange flame is blowing back at me, and that's when I stop. And you want to make sure that you get this annealed all the way around the disc properly. Okay. That's it. That's all I need to do. Now I'm going to let this set for about 5 minutes. I'm going to test it by dropping a little drop of water on it and making sure that if the water stays in a ball and runs across the metal like this, see how that ball ran across the metal? It's too hot to quench. I'm going to wait until whenever I drop a ball of water on there, that the water stays in place and then evaporates. And now you can see that is ready to quench. Let's briefly discuss what deep draw is. So deep draw is a quick and an effective way in raising a form. And a lot of things that we use in our life today are created with this method. For instance, cooking pots and metal water bottles. Both of those are created with the deep draw method. And what it is it's simply taking a disc of metal and it's forcing that disc of metal through a die with a corresponding punch. That's a very simplistic and precise definition of deep draw. So let's stop talking about deep draw and let's do some. Here's some of the equipment that I'm using in this project. I'm using the master die set, a hemisphere punch and a bullet punch. These work together with 18 gauge sheet metal, standoffs, alignment guides, and I'm using the 20-ton classic press. The 3-inch deep draw kit will work in this press. It'll work in the Mark III press and also in the 55-ton Pro. Now I'm going to load my disc into my die set. So take these bolts out. This is a 2-part die. You have a top plate and a bottom plate. Your bottom plate has a radius on it, and this is the half of the die that your disc is going to be pushed through with the punch. I'm going to use just a little bit of burr life, and I mean just a little bit. You don't need a lot. It doesn't require a lot, because for this particular, the 3-inch, and doing these hemisphere and bullets, it doesn't have a lot of friction that has to be overcome. So, but you do need to go ahead and lube, and I just lube the bottom die. Now, with pattern sheet like this, you need to make sure that where you want your pattern. So if you want your pattern on the outside of your vessel, then you need to make sure that your pattern is pointing down into the die. If you load it this way, the pattern is going to be inside of the vessel. So I'm going to put this pattern down. I'm going to eyeball it as well as I can to center, using the edge of the holes, the bolt holes here, and the edge of the disc. Then I'm going to very carefully lower the top plate down. I want to align these through holes with the bolt holes in the bottom plate as well as I can, because I don't want to move this around a lot trying to find bolt holes. So I'm going to set it in place as good as I can, set it down, and let me see how I did. So that one is engaged. Wow, don't normally get it on the first try. I'm just going to take these bolts down, but I'm not going to snug them up yet. And I'm going to use a ruler to measure. I'm going to do this from side to side. And I'm going to use the bolt to actually set my ruler against, the top of the ruler against, and then I'm going to push it in until I touch the disc itself and take my measurement. Then I'll rotate it around, take my measurement again, and see how close I am to side as far as accuracy. Now, if I need to move it, which that way it looks pretty good, I might need to nudge it over a little bit. I could just use the ruler to push against the disc and hold my fingers against the sides of the die plate and just push in just a little bit to move that disc one way or the other to try to get it as centered as possible. Now I go to the other bolts and I do the same thing. Now there really is no exact, well, I guess there would be an exact measurement if you are using an exact 3-inch in diameter disc. However, discs can vary, and even if you're cutting them yourself, you can be off just a little bit. So I just measure it and I will compare it all the way around, do whatever I need to do to push it one way or the other until I have the disc in the center as good as I can get it. And then I'm just going to finger tight the bolts. I'm not going to tighten them a lot. I'm just going to do it finger tight, and now I'm ready to press. Now I'm taking 2 of the standoff rings and I'm going to place those right in the center of my bottom platen and align the 2 so that they are in the center. And this will actually help me align the rest of my die set once I get that assembled and go to put it into my press. And I'm also going to use a piece of 95 durometer urethane. This is to protect the end of my form. Whenever the punch drops through the die, it can actually come into contact with the steel platen and it would leave a flat spot. So that's what that little piece of urethane is for. Now, one of the standoff rings have pins, and these pins locate into the bottom of your die set in these holes. And what that does is that just makes sure that your standoffs that you need for clearance of your form as it comes through the die is going to be in a position where it's not going to interfere with the form. Now, the alignment tool goes on. It has pins in the top of the die set, and they engage into holes in the alignment tool. And then the punch will set in. The alignment tool just keeps the punch square with your die. And now I'll align it with the rings on the press. I want to make sure my whole stack is in the center of my bottom platen. So I'm going to look at it from different angles and make sure that it is centered in my press. Once I'm sure everything is centered properly, then I'm going to start pressing. Now pay attention to these two plates. As the punch goes further into the die, pushing the metal into the die, these two plates will start to come together. And if you look between the two plates, you can actually see the metal flow into the die. And I'm going to continue to press until this almost touches my top platen. I'm going to let it come down a little bit, and I'm going to remove the alignment tool because it's no longer needed. And then I'm going to continue. And there we go. And now I'm going to lift off my die. You want to make sure you don't pull everything off at one time because this will fall through. And I'm going to pull my punch out, and now there is my form. So I have both of my discs formed now, and you can see that there's still a lot more work to get to a point that looks like this, where you have this nice flowing form. However, to take a 3-inch disc and turn it into a form like this by hand would require many hours of work. With this, we did it in about 5 minutes. So to further refine the shape, I'm going to planish these pieces on the punches themselves. I'll start with the hemisphere punch. And you can see, if you're wondering what this blue surface is, this is just tape over my anvil. Since I'm using my anvil as support to support the punch as I'm planishing, I don't want to mar the surface of my anvil. So the hemisphere form will be ironed to your punch pretty tight, and it's going to be kind of difficult to remove. Now you can utilize the removal tool to remove this, or like I'm doing here, I'm going to leave this on the punch. I'm going to planish this form a little better, and in doing that, it's going to stretch the form out just a little bit, and it'll allow it to release from the punch a little easier. So I'm using a nylon hammer, and I'm going to start planishing from the top of the form down all the way around. Okay, so it's been planished all the way around, and it is a much more flowing shape now, and it comes off of the punch. So now I'm going to start on the bullet punch, and I'm going to do the same thing. All right, so that is now planished nicely. It has a much more fluid shape to it. And you will have to anneal this bullet shape once and continue to planish it. I like to planish as much as I can before I anneal. Whenever the metal is responding in such a way that it's just not moving, then I'll go ahead and anneal it. I don't like to anneal a whole bunch of times. So I annealed it once, and now you can see that the shapes are definitely coming together. So the next step is trimming the bottoms of these shapes. And the first step to trim is I need a line to trim to. So I'm actually going to use what's called a surface gauge. And this is what I'm going to use to mark around the form a nice straight line. I'm going to use it on the punch so that I don't have to worry about holding it in the right position, because now that this form has been planished to this punch, it is form fitting to this punch. So I am going to find where I want to trim to, and then make sure I'm taking off as much as I want to, maybe just a tad bit higher, and I'm going to run that scribe against the piece as I turn it, and now that gives me my line that I need to cut to. Now, if you don't have a surface gauge, then you can actually improvise by stacking up a number of items that you can set a pen down flush at the level of where you want to mark to cut, and just spin, and there you go. A nice straight line. It's going to be even. It's going to be level to cut to. Now I'm going to start to saw this lip off. So what I did is I raised my bench pen a bit. I like sawing at a little bit higher level. And I created a notch that the edge of the form will ride into. It'll be a little bit easier to control. And I'm going to come up to the line and start my cut. I want to leave the line so I can file up to it. This is going to be just like cutting tubing. So I'm not going to try to cut this all the way through in one spot. I'm going to slowly work myself around the entire form until I've created a trench that will finally cut through. And I'm just going to continue doing this until I get it cut out. It's a lot easier and a lot quicker to be accurate with your cutting than to try to clean up any mistakes by being a little bit too rambunctious. I have my pieces sanded, nice and flush, and now I just finished the edge by creating a ring that actually fits on the end of the form and finishes that off. And also I made a ring like this that it's two parts. There's an inner sleeve and there's an outer ring, and the ring I soldered directly in the center, and it creates this lip. And this lip allows the two parts to go together and stay. And now all I have to do is clean it up, give it a patina, and it'll be finished. So the first step in the patina process is to clean the surface really, really well. You want it free of dirt, grease, grime, and any oxides, because if you have any of that on it, you're not going to get a good, even patina. I'm using a product called No Name Patina Prep, and it works really, really well. All right, that looks good. I'm going to rinse it off really, really well. And now I'm going to start applying the patina immediately. So the reason I'm doing this and not waiting is that oxides, copper in particular, builds oxides very quickly. And as soon as you have rinsed it off and you've got that cleaner off, it's going to start building oxides. And that looks like a nice, even patina. So the only thing left now is to go ahead and rinse this, let it dry, and then put a coat of wax on it. I'm now going to apply paste wax, and what I'm using is Renaissance wax. I forgot to tell you that the patina that I used on this is called Baldwin's patina, and it actually will patina the copper or any high copper content alloys, but it will not patina the silver. So it's a really great patina to bring out that contrast. So this is how I apply Renaissance wax. I just put it on with a brush. I let it set for a little while. I already did this one. And then I will buff it off. So you can see that there's definitely, that wax really made a nice depth of color. And you can continue to put a couple more coats on. The color will change slightly. It'll become a little bit richer. This is set long enough. So I'll take this one, polish this one up. And now the piece is done. And that was a shallow dive into deep draw. There are so many other things that can be done with this method of forming. And you can see that this saves time. So from the cutting of the disc to the application of the final patina was a little less than 2 hours to make that piece. And this brings us to a discussion on appropriate technologies. And what I mean by that is using the appropriate equipment and tooling to match your production needs. If you're only making one of these, then monetarily it does not make sense to invest in the equipment to do this. However, if you're doing 20 or 50 or 1,000 of these vessels or something similar, any type of repetitive shape, then this method of forming is the only thing that really makes sense. So I hope that you found the information in this video helpful. And if you're interested in the equipment and tooling that I used in this video, you'll find links in the description below. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions about how the deep draw method or hydraulic forming in general can help your production, then feel free, give us a call. We're here to help.